Hello, Marty Braden here. Welcome. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, thanks for checking it out. My goal is to satisfy your curiosity for this video's subject, why there almost certainly is no God. Before we jump right into it, I'd like to first explain why I started this channel in the first place. I recently finished writing a book I titled An Atheist Delusion. It's a rebuttal to the world-renowned atheist Richard Dawkins and his book The God Delusion. My book is a Latter-day Saints perspective on Dawkins' anti-theist, antichrist arguments against God's existence. I recently published it and I'm now reviewing it by recording these short videos that are explanations on all of the many topics I cover in my book. And that way folks like you don't have to go out and spend 20 bucks for it. The video you're watching now is part 79 in this series of videos, where I review chapter 4's introduction to its title, Why There's Most Certainly No God. After the introduction's comments, Richard goes through a number of subtitle topics, so I'm going to go back and pick it up at the beginning of chapter 4. Richard begins chapter 4 by quoting Thomas Jefferson, who Richard claims was a deist. Thomas said the following, and I quote, "The priests of the different religious sects dread the advance of science as witches do the approach of daylight, and scowl on the daedal harbinger announcing the subdivision of the decrees on which they live." End quote. Richard says a little later, "The argument from probability is indeed very strong, and I suspect unanswerable from the theist's intention. My name for this statistical demonstration that God almost certainly does not exist is the ultimate Boeing 747 gambit." End quote. This analogy came from Fred Hoyle, who said, quote, "The probability of life originating on Earth is no greater than the chance that a hurricane sweeping through a scrapyard would have all the luck to assemble a Boeing 747. This, in a nutshell, is the creationist's favorite argument." End quote. Affirming Hoyle's statement, Richard follows it up by saying, "This is an argument that could be made only by somebody who doesn't understand the first thing about natural selection. Somebody who thinks natural selection is a theory of chance, whereas in the relevant sense of chance, it is the opposite." End quote. Are we to accept Richard's word for it? I certainly do not. If you were to take each of the millions of birds and animals on this planet, for example, individually, taking them one by one in your hands, and consider their eyes, the color of their feathers, or the uniqueness of their fur, or their internal organs, and ask, why are the animals or birds so perfectly complete? How come they are finished and not producing any kind of offspring that has its own unique and obvious new kind mutations? And why aren't any of them living right here amongst us even now? Why are the offspring from the finished male and female parents of these kinds so perfect that we don't have a single mutated offspring living amongst us today? An offspring that is unfinished, in other words, each still evolving so that one can see these proofs that Darwin's natural selection theory is real. A kind is not a species. So I'm going to jump right off of here because there's one other thing I want to do. I want to stop here for a moment and read you from a comment string where I had an exchange with a viewer regarding one of my videos. Its title is Why Atheism is a Quasi-Religion. You can go to that video and read the entire comments in the video's comment string. The viewer identified himself as an atheist, and believe it or not, it was a friendly and kindly exchange that I thought you might find quite informative, especially as we're talking about this topic. At least I certainly did. So here's what we said to each other back and forth. I'm going to refer to Mustache Mac, which is his handle, as Atheist said, and myself as, and then I said. Atheist said, "We can demonstrate that evolution happens. There are mountains of evidence to support it. We can actually perform and view evolution as it happens in a lab and outside of it. Nobody can demonstrate creation. Nobody can demonstrate a creator. So until you can actually demonstrate these ideas, creationism needs to stay out of our school system." The thing is, you don't want to teach about creation in schools anyway. You want to teach about Christianity in schools. "I'm fairly certain," he says, "that if a school curriculum consisted of the Hindu gods that created the world, you would be all against that." Well, I said, "Thanks for stopping in and sharing some of your thoughts, Mustache Mac. In a later chapter, I addressed the topic of evolution and your argument that science supposedly is demonstrating evolution in the lab, and in particular, scientists are viewing it as it happens. So I will only make this one comment about it for now. There is a big difference between kinds and species. Species changes being made being without you, species changes being what you are talking about. So yes, there are small changes within a species, such as the evolving of a beak on a bird as an example. However, never, and I mean never, has a kind jumped over to an entirely new kind, such as the dog kind jumping over to a cat kind, so that evolves into a doggy kitten. And today there are many atheist scientists who, in fact, are starting to express real doubts in Darwin's theory of evolution. But anyway, we certainly can agree to disagree here. Atheist then said, I appreciate your response. The very idea that you think evolution describes a doggy kind can change into a cat kind is wrong. Why do you think we have so many different breeds of dogs and cats? It's evolution. Let me guess your answer is microevolution happens, just not macroevolution, right? I then said, great question, Mustache Mac. A kind of animal, for example, is a term used in a general or natural sense of the word. It is used to refer to a group of animals that are similar in some way. For example, one might say dogs are a kind of animal. A species of an animal, on the other hand, is a scientific term used to refer to a group of animals that are able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring of the same kind. This is a more specific classification than simply grouping animals by their similarities. For example, Canis lupus is the scientific name for the gray wolf species, and there are multiple species within the kind called dog, etc. Of course, I'm specifically referring to Genesis, where God commanded the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air and the creepy things on the ground and mankind itself to multiply after its kind and not after its species. Atheists then said, I see, so kind is an arbitrary word that can be applied in any way. It doesn't really narrow down to any meaningful way that we can distinguish what we're talking about. Couldn't we say a flying kind or a swimming kind? Obviously, birds and bats can fly, but they're not the same kind. Dolphins and fish both can swim, but they're not the same kind. When I went online and looked up what a kind was, the only websites that pulled any information on it were creationist websites. How very interesting. I then said, just so we're on the same sheet of music here, I went back 100 years to see what the 1825 dictionary listed for kind and genus, G-E-N-U-S. And here's what it said for the noun kind. Kind, noun 1, race, genus, generic class, as in mankind or humankind. In technical language, kind answers to genus. Number 2, sort, in a sense more loose than genus, as there are several kinds of eloquence and of style, many kinds of music, many kinds of government, various kinds of architecture or of painting, various kinds of soil, etc. Number 3, particular nature, as laws most perfect in their kind. 4, natural state, produce or commodity as distinguished from money, as taxes paid in kind, as an example. 5, nature, natural propensity or determination. Some of you on pure instinct of nature are led by kind to admire your fellow creature. And 6, manner, way, little use. This one's a little used. And number 7, sort. He spoke with a kind of scorn or contempt. And for the word genus, noun, G-E parentheses, N-U-S, genus, noun plural, genuses are genera, Latin genus, see gender. Number 1, and here it is, in logic, that which has several species under it, a class of a greater extent than species, a universal which is predictable of several things of different species. And number 2, in natural history, an assemblage of species possessing certain characters in common, by which they are distinguished from all others. It is subordinate to class and order, and some arrangements to tribe and family. Okay. A single species possessing certain peculiar characters, it says, which belong to no other species, may also constitute a genus, such as the camelopard and the flamingo. Number 3, in botany, a genus is a subdivision containing plants of the same class or order, which agree in their parts of fructification. That's a different word, isn't it? So yes, it is very interesting that over the last 100 years, certain people have worked very hard to redefine many words that we use today, having replaced them with very different definitions than what were associated with them a century ago. What does that mean? Well, to me, it means that Satan and his followers are hard at work trying to get God's children to reject the truth about their origin and about the origin of all living things. And I am not oblivious to the fact that you, as an atheist, Mustache Mac, have a very different meaning for these very important words that mean different things in today's vocabulary than they did so many, many years ago. That said, thanks for your willingness to keep the conversation going. I find it very helpful and enlightening, especially when I'm able to learn even more from an atheist friend such as yourself. I truly want to understand how you as an atheist thinks and how your scientific mind works. It's so fascinating to me. So that was the conversation that I had in the comment section. So I'm going to go back now to the chapter we're reviewing. The fact is, this theoretical process hasn't produced any examples of its process for at least 6,000 years, maybe more. Not even one out of more than 1,000 kinds. Nope, not even one. I guess natural selection knows when something is finished and has reached its perfection, right? But how? If evolution by natural selection was a true and proven theory or process for the development of all life here on Earth, we absolutely would still have thousands, if not millions, of examples of animals in this unique stage of mutating offspring living or existing amongst us today. There's certainly been enough time for it, that's for sure, but we don't. Did it all get finished and it's perfected now? They're all perfect? Come on, give me a break. A bird with its beak evolving within the exact same bird species is not such an example of this theory at work. I repeat, it certainly is not such an example. The reason there aren't any such examples of new kinds jumping lanes over to a totally different kind is because all kinds were finished and complete when the cells that made up their embryos were organized by God, each one being activated with life-giving power so that they began to grow and develop into that perfect human being or that perfect bird or whatever. Everything those embryos needed in order to grow to a fully developed and finished creature was in their parent cells, meaning it was in their DNA, period. Each are examples of finished, perfectly created or organized kinds that God said were good. Another word meaning complete, which we've already talked about in a previous video. Out of the millions upon millions of species of birds, insects, and animals over every kind, there's never been a single example of a kind jumping over to a different lane of kind via the so-called natural selection's birth-iteration-mutation process. Period. End of story. Even with its supposed millions of years to produce them, there's not even one, nor has there ever been one example that can be held up to support Darwin's claim that this theory is still at work today. Isn't it fantastic? Not even one, yet the complete, it is finished and good method of God's creation offers millions of examples existing on this planet, which support his creative process. It starts perfectly in the DNA. Everything they need to be that human or that bird or that elephant is contained in those two cells of the parents. Let him who has eyes to see all that's available before us. I suggest that you be honest fruit inspectors so that the truth can be spoken to you and set you and your mind free from this spurious, what I call Antichrist con. I included a considerable amount of information on this subject of evolution in my introduction, and so I'm going to go ahead and leave it right here and there and move on to the first subtitle of this chapter 4, which is the ultimate Boeing 747 example I mentioned. I'm confident that you, my readers, and my viewers will find this very interesting. It's an incredibly interesting topic indeed. At least I certainly think so. So until next time, I want you to write down your comments, ask your questions. I don't care what side you're on, keep it nice and kindly, and we'll be it's a great interchange that we can enjoy each other's comments. But until next time, I want to wish you continued success. Goodbye.